Hello. So, hi everyone. I'm thrilled to be back here this year again. I'm delighted and I'm very thankful to the organizers for inviting me again this year. Because the most important reason that I am here is because Julian cannot be here. But I do have something from him. This is a drawing that Julian made in Belmarsh, which he gave me permission to show you today. The serpent is inspired by a painting by William Blake. I know that once Julian is free, and I believe he will be free, he will be speaking to you and all people who value the basic freedom to speak and associate freely. It is not a cliché to say that it is up to us to free him. It really is. And the reasons to free him are abundantly clear. He is a target of a brutal, unprecedented injustice. But this year I want to talk to you about the broader implications of his freedom for this community and the role that this community plays in safeguarding freedom of speech. Now, you will have to forgive me for invoking the United Nations. I know many of you are probably skeptical for good reason. But the specific thing I want to invoke is the foundational document of the UN human rights system from 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the way that the drafters chose to define freedom of speech. Article 19 of this foundational document states, "Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers." This is 1948, and I find this definition really insightful because it breaks down this freedom of speech into the act of seeking, receiving, and imparting information. When Julian established WikiLeaks in 2006, he found a way to put subjugated history into the public domain. As you know, WikiLeaks transformed access to information forever. Julian built WikiLeaks as a decentralized online library, the rebel library of Alexandria, he called it. The decentralized aspect allowed it to be censorship resistant. Cryptography provided a gateway for the whistleblowers and the sources to bring censored documents into the public domain and to do it anonymously. Prior to the internet, censorship had focused on preventing the act of speaking, of imparting information. But with the internet, censorship has become increasingly more sophisticated. And the question is no longer whether the truth can be spoken, but whether it can be heard and seen. The focus of censorship has shifted away from actively curbing the act of speaking to manipulating the ability to seek and receive information. This process has accelerated over the past 7 years or so. It is so comprehensive, so coordinated, that it is attempting to destroy the public domain itself. I don't think this is an exaggeration. The rise of the censorship industrial complex has transformed the information landscape. The censors are a network of actors and hybrids: government, the press, NGOs, think tanks, social media companies, academic institutions. They service the new economy that promotes the notion that information is dangerous and that the public's access to it involves risks that must be managed. Democratic processes are problematized, and even true and newsworthy information is cast as a potential threat because nefarious entities could exploit the information. The censorship industrial complex grew out of two significant shocks to the system in 2016. One was the British voters' decision to Brexit. The second was Donald Trump's victory in the presidential election. And one of the factors which the Clinton campaign blamed for its loss was WikiLeaks' publication of the DNC and Podesta emails, which revealed how the Clinton campaign had rigged the primaries against its rival in the primaries for the Democratic nomination, Bernie Sanders. And the Clinton campaign, it was revealed in these documents, in these emails, also had interfered in the Republican primaries by deploying what it called the Pied Piper strategy, which was to boost Donald Trump's visibility, exposure in the media through its network, in the mistaken belief that Donald Trump's exposure would lose votes to the Republicans. While the Clinton campaign and much of the Democratic establishment cast WikiLeaks' publication of the DNC emails in a negative light, when the DNC tried to file a lawsuit against Julian and WikiLeaks for the publication of the DNC emails, the court viewed the publication very differently. The court threw out the lawsuit on First Amendment grounds, and in dismissing the case, the court described the publication of the DNC emails in the following way. It was a publication of matters of the highest public concern. The DNC's published internal communications allowed the American electorate to look behind the curtain of one of the two major political parties in the United States during a presidential election. This type of information is plainly of the type entitled to the strongest protection that the First Amendment offers. You probably didn't hear about that ruling. The dismissal of the lawsuit and the reasons behind it were barely reported on. With no apparent pushback or counter-narrative, the censorship industrial complex was allowed to flourish. By 2020, two of the central players of this censorship industrial complex, the Aspen Institute and Stanford University's Cyber Policy Center, had found a formula to prevent true information from informing the democratic process. The strategy was to convince reporters and social media companies that it was time to introduce a new set of norms and break with what they called the Pentagon Papers principle. The Pentagon Papers are often cited as a precursor to WikiLeaks' publication of the Afghan and Iraq war logs. It is also a sort of myth of origin of the press freedom in the United States. It is a moment in history when, despite legal attacks on the publishers, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and dirty tricks against the whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg, the public interest prevailed and the foundation for future publishing was set. That foundation remained strong up until the Trump administration decided to indict Julian under the Espionage Act for the act of publishing and news gathering. But let's go back to the Pentagon Papers. The Pentagon Papers leak happened 50 years ago, and it was an internal Department of Defense report which was leaked by Daniel Ellsberg, and it was published by the Washington Post, New York Times, and revealed how the administration had been lying to the American public and also to Congress about how the war was going and the end game in Vietnam, or lack thereof. The Aspen Institute and Stanford Cyber Policy Center in 2020 didn't allege that the Pentagon Papers principle was illegal. They argue that there should be a change of norms, a change of institutional culture in the media houses and social media companies. The press and social media should adopt the role of the censor, that considerations of potential harm, vaguely defined, should weigh more heavily than the newsworthiness and authenticity of the information, that malicious actors could exploit the information and the public must be protected from its own reactive instincts. It basically invites all these different players to participate in a social construct that is projected onto the public and which obscures reality. The censorship industrial complex's big debut was a breathtakingly effective suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story. To begin with, the media pre-bunked the story. The New York Post, had hardly broken the story before it was declared to be a disinfo op. The pre-bunking was significantly bolstered by a public statement signed by 51 former intelligence officials affirming that the laptop belonging to Hunter Biden was disinformation, that it was bogus. Twitter famously suppressed links to the story on the New York Post website. Mark Zuckerberg told Joe Rogan that Facebook had suppressed the Hunter Biden story after a call from the FBI telling them to do so. The laptop was authentic, of course. It wasn't a disinformation, and the story was effectively buried in the lead-up to the 2020 election. It happened quickly, it happened effectively, including through a tabletop exercise at the Aspen Institute with all these players who later suppressed the story, which was essentially a dry run for breaking for the time when the Hunter Biden story broke in the New York Post. The truth eventually came out. Earlier this year, Mike Morell, the former CIA deputy director, testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And he said that the current Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who at the time was a senior advisor to the Biden administration, instigated the bogus public statement by the 51 former intelligence officials. The Twitter files, various Senate hearings, Missouri Biden case have all revealed a great deal about the censorship industrial complex and how it is undermining the public's First Amendment freedoms. There's plenty of material out there, but the importance and implications of these events have been downplayed by the players, like the press, who of course are not neutral bystanders. Meanwhile, legislation like the Online Safety Bill in the UK, or the EU's Digital Services Act, and similar statutes around the world are transferring the power to moderate content online from tech companies to governments. These types of forms of legislation impose a duty of care onto tech firms, and including incentives and pressure points to censor harmful but legal content. The case of the extraordinarily popular podcaster Russell Brand shows how public officials are now using their new powers to pressure platforms into demonetizing specific content creators. I'm sure you're all aware of the context. Allegations, some of them criminal, have been made against Brand in the media. YouTube immediately announced it was demonetizing Brand's channel, almost immediately, and the BBC and Channel 4 in the UK deleted their historic content containing Russell Brand. Whether he is eventually charged with a crime or convicted of it in the future, the fact is that the cancellation has been sudden and it has a final quality to it. The most disturbing aspect of all of this, apart from the apparent irrelevance of the legal presumption of innocence, is that the most aggressive push to demonetize Russell Brand came from the chair of the UK Parliament's Digital, Cultural, Media and Sport Committee, the lady over there whose name is Dame Caroline Dinenage, who wrote to TikTok and Rumble demanding that they disclose whether Brand was making a living from the content on his channel. And the real target, of course, isn't Brand. It's Rumble. It's the content platform. It is a form of eliciting compliance. And the powers to elicit that compliance have been adopted in multiple jurisdictions through these types of legislation. Dame Caroline Dinenage isn't just any Conservative MP, Member of Parliament. She introduced the Online Safety Bill, and her husband, over there, is Mark Lancaster, who until recently was the deputy commander of the 77th Brigade. Now, what is the 77th Brigade? According to the BBC, the 77th Brigade is made up of, quote, warriors who don't just carry weapons, but they are also skilled in using social media such as Twitter and Facebook and the dark art of PSYOPs, psychological operations. So, while the censorship industrial complex continues to grow, the world's most famous freedom of speech champion remains imprisoned. Those who have put Julian in prison are the same ones who fear true information reaching the masses, because they fear what the public might do with information that can change the status quo. The criminal case against Julian criminalizes the act of publishing. The public interest of the documents that WikiLeaks published is not in question. He faces 175 years. The authenticity of the documents is also not in question. It documents the killing of tens of thousands of civilians, evidence of war crimes, political interference in judicial processes, complicity in torture of multiple countries, etc. It is the act of publishing and what Julian stands for, which is being punished, and it is being made an example of the punishment through his imprisonment. Julian is, after all, the greatest contributor to the historical record and its most ardent defender. He's imprisoned because of his role in bringing subjugated history onto the public record, of growing the historical record, and of protecting its integrity. He built WikiLeaks to encourage access to public interest information by providing a means through which sources could provide information anonymously. Julian also recognized the potential for Bitcoin and its role in contributing to the preservation of the historical record, and he recognized this early on. In 2014, he appeared as a hologram in Nantucket, Massachusetts, and he told the audience that the underlying architecture of Bitcoin provides public value beyond the obvious financial innovations. He explained how during the USSR, when Stalin died, Beria fell out of favor with the new power factions, and there was a decision to remove his entry from the official encyclopedia, and so an order was issued to remove the pages containing Beria's biography and to expand the entry about the Barents Sea. And so this was done, but this rudimentary form of censorship was obvious. You could see the glue where the pages have been replaced. Maybe you could notice the texture was different between the different pages and so on. But during altering history, hiding the censorship became very easy during when the internet appeared. There was no glue, no visible texture to indicate that there had been an alteration to history. Bitcoin technology, Julian told the Nantucket audience, could defeat internet censorship. It allows the proof that a particular thing was published at a particular time. It breaks Orwell's dictum: you do not control the future if you are unable to alter the past. 9 years ago, WikiLeaks used the blockchain technology to show proof of publication through publishing a hash. I was lucky that while I was preparing this speech, this project appeared. An anonymous group called has started Project Spartacus, which puts this idea into practice. It uses the Ordinals protocol to inscribe the WikiLeaks Afghan war logs to the Bitcoin blockchain, and you can look it up, projectspartacus.org. Last night there were 252 Afghan war logs that had been inscribed, and there's 76,000 to go. So do look into it and participate. The Afghan war diaries, if you're wondering what the content is, were published in 2010, and one of the publications for which Julian is facing 175 years for publishing. They cut through the fog of war, revealed some 20,000 deaths, including at least 195 previously unreported deaths of civilians committed by NATO troops. So Julian created WikiLeaks as the Internet's own rebel library of Alexandria. WikiLeaks would give asylum to the world's most persecuted documents. They would find a safe haven, and they would be secured and made accessible. The integrity of the historical record was assured. It was not just secured, but also imparted, sought, and received by the public. In 2012, Julian wrote a call to cryptographic arms. He sounded a warning, what he called a watchman's shout into the night. This is a quote. "Recall that states are the systems which determine where and how coercive force is consistently applied. The question of how much coercive force can seep into the platonic realm of the Internet from the physical world is answered by cryptography and the cypherpunks' ideals. As states merge with the Internet and the future of our civilization becomes the future of the Internet, we must redefine force relations. If we do not, the universality of the Internet will merge global humanity into one giant grid of mass surveillance and mass control." He published this in 2012. The censors are not just after Julian and WikiLeaks. The objective is not simply to suppress recent history. Julian's ongoing imprisonment has emboldened the censors. They have turned their sights to the present, seeking the total control over the public domain itself. Our voice and our ears are collective reality. A world in which Julian is free is a world that will continue to build initiatives that recognize what we are up against. Free Julian, free us all. Thank you.